There is always something to talk about in Nigeria. It just depends on what topic catches your fancy. From insecurity to poverty and inflation, the Electoral Act to issues of restructuring and the Petroleum Industry Bill. But in all of this, politicians have not lost sight of the 2023 general election. Almost all policies, plans and programs of government are now laced with political sentiments. This is Politics on Sunday. I am Femi Akonde. Another issue on the desk of the federal government is the legal tussle to repatriate Yoruba activist Sunday Adeyemo, popularly known as Sunday Igboho, from the Republic of Benin. It is unclear how this would be resolved. Igboho is facing immigration-related charges, but in Nigeria, his lawyers have also dragged the State Security Service to court for failure to arraign the 12 aides of the activist arrested during a raid on his home in Ibadan.
Essentially, the applicants that were arrested by the respondent, which is the DSS, came to court through their lawyers to seek the refuge of the court. Came to court to seek the refuge of the court, the protection of the court. Our law is such that, particularly Section 32, Sub 1 and 2 of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act of Nigeria 2015 has clearly stated that has clothed the court with the powers and the jurisdiction to compel any security agency or any state agency that is holding anybody unlawfully to produce the person. And that is the section, that is the law that we have invoked in the court today. And in respect for this constitution, the court found merit in our application, and the court has compelled the DSS to produce the applicant to the court in the next adjourned date. This is very important because, you see, we must not encourage people who are given powers to work on behalf of the state to abuse the power. The applicants were arrested in a Gestapo manner, and they've been kept incommunicado for almost 20 days. As a matter of fact, we've written to the DSS on several occasions, we've visited their facility, but they've denied the applicants the opportunity to meet with their lawyers. They've denied the applicants the opportunity to meet with their family. But today we are glad that the court has found merit in this application. So we can only thank God and thank the court for its industry and for understanding that the judiciary is the last hope of the common man.
The recently passed Petroleum Industry Bill is still causing unease among major stakeholders in the oil-rich region and players in the petroleum industry. Senator Seriake Dixon from Bayelsa State has even asked Mr. President to withhold his assent on the bill. He queries how the percentage for host communities initially proposed for 5% was reduced to 3%. He even points fingers at the Minister of State for Petroleum, Timipre Silva, who is also from the oil-rich Niger Delta region, for shortchanging his people by allegedly proposing 2.5% as host community share.
What will happen if the president assents to this bill, which we disagree with, and I say that, everybody knows my position. Number one, the 3%, as it relates to the 3%, and some other issues, we think that there should be a review. There shouldn't even be a signature. Shouldn't even assent to it. Should send it for more consultative and inclusive work, so that while trying to solve problems, you don't create more problems. And as for guarantor, the president is apart from God, is the president who is the repository of all security powers. So my brother, my namesake Henry, is the president that will determine and perhaps help to guarantee stability and safety. But if you have not done so in the Northeast for 10 years, you are not doing so in the Northwest for 3-4 years, huh? And in the Southeast, in the Southwest, I think it's against the national interest to open another frontier of conflict. Perhaps in the only region that is enjoying relative stability because of the policies that President Yar'Adua initiated. He not only proposed 10% on the PIB for communities, granted amnesty, which is still working, and we're all in support of it. Created the Ministry of Niger Delta. Okay? Huh. And that's how you build a country. Stepping in, standing for the weak and the few, and not relying on numbers and power. Okay.
Joining me to put the issues around the PIB into perspective is Faiz Mohammed, a public affairs analyst from Seed Builders Consulting. Yeah, let's talk about this PIB, a very contentious bill, spent more than 2 decades in the National Assembly. And why the force around this bill?
Well, I think that first, I think we need to commend the president for summoning enough political will to bring the bill to this stage, because it has been languishing in the House for nearly over a decade, in fact. I think there are already various lobbyist groups from each angle of the bill. I'm sure some of them have the ear of the president telling him what it is their main concerns are. Yeah. And I think there are issues with the bill in its current state, not least, of course, is the level at which it seems that they have not put enough consideration for host communities. Yeah. But for me, I think the part that really stands out is a particular statute in the bill that seeks to bifurcate or separate the DPR, the Department of Petroleum Resources, into 2 separate agencies. I think this is a very costly mistake for the oil sector in general, but also it speaks to how our policy, how we institute policy in this country has always been about duplicating duties and several committees and instituting panels. And so we have so many regulatory agencies across so many sectors of the economy that are basically duplicating functions. And for the DPR specifically, when you think about the oil industry and how integral it is to the revenue stream of this government, it seems to me a very questionable line of argument to say that this is particularly the time that you want to bifurcate this industry into 2. A little bit of background: the DPR has been in existence for about 51 years now. And they've been the sole, or at least the primary regulator for the oil industry. Now, they're handling both the upstream sectors, which has to do with extraction and exploration and drilling, and the downstream sectors, which has to do with distribution of oil products. Now, there's such a thing as institutional memory. And in the institutional memory of an organization means that it has the knowledge base of how best to operate within a sector. It understands the detriments of moving too quickly or moving too fast. It has a wellspring of data that it has put together over several decades of work, so that it's able to withstand shocks to the system much easier than a new organization would be able to. Now, by removing, or should I say by separating these 2 aspects, what you're doing basically is making things more difficult for players in the market. A company such as Con Oil, for example, does business with both the upstream and the downstream sectors. Does this mean now that you have 2 different regulators that you're going to have two different forms of taxation. They're going to have to go through two different regulators to get through the same service that they were now getting through one. And none of this is made particularly clear by the bill. And I think it's also problematic in that at a time when we should be focusing on, bringing down the cost of doing business in the oil sector and focusing on renewable sources of energy, as most progressive nations are doing, we seem to be instead talking about or thinking about adding administrative costs.
So in essence, what you're saying is the PIB that has just been passed and lawmakers are giving themselves a pat on the back for that may not just be that bill that would really turn around the petroleum sector.
Oh, I think that's actually the biggest mistake that everyone is making. The idea somehow that once this bill is passed and once the DPR itself is bifurcated, it's going to create an easy avenue where things are going to change very quickly, I think is a very, it's a questionable line of thinking, because first of all, we're not changing staff. We're not changing the heads of these commissions. We're not changing permanent secretaries. The same people that have been running it are going to be running it moving forward. All you've done now is that you've removed the coordination that used to exist from one agency and bifurcated it into two. Doesn't that make it more difficult for players in the system when they have to deal with more regulators instead of one single avenue? What happened to the Ease of Doing Business initiative?
That means, would you say lawmakers were ill-advised because, there are different public hearings, different consultations at different levels. How come they didn't pay attention to this very important aspect we're talking about?
Far be it from me to presume exactly what the lawmakers were thinking, but I do think, like I mentioned earlier, this is part of the problem when it comes to policy in this country, is that we spend so much time duplicating things that we've done before. In 2011, the Stephen Orensaya report already intimated in their recommendation to the president that we needed to reduce the number of agencies that are in existence currently. The panel came out as saying that the level of duplication we already have within the public service has stagnated not just public institutions, but has also pulled down our development as a nation in its totality. There were at the time 263 different institutions that they recommended needed to be downsized so that we're only operating 161. And this was way back in 2011. New ministries and new parastatals have sprung up since then. Why is the administration focusing or allowing for, I said the administration, I should say the National Assembly, allowing for the possibility of new agencies to spring up and adding to administrative costs, when you can reduce those costs and use the savings to invest in renewable sources of energy, invest in Niger Delta communities, create new infrastructure when we know that our infrastructure is dilapidating. I'm not sure this is a very good use of our resources.
Okay, and one contentious part of this bill is the percentage for host communities, the share for host communities. A lot of them are demanding for 5%. We've seen groups from the South, including the Southern Governors Forum, but the Senate is insisting on 3%. Is this a fair deal?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I think it's 5% was even a very conservative estimate for what it is, because according to the UNDP, in their policy of the development mandate that they sent out for developing nations, for host communities it should be at least 10%. But they didn't ask for 10%, they asked for 50% of that. And the problem was that the Senate did not even take the time to consider this approach. Okay, 5%, how is that going to be shared? What avenues are we going to follow to ensure that this money is better used moving forward than it has been over the past couple of decades? Have the conversation. Because I think it's fair to say that as much as Nigeria's wealth has been focused in the Niger Delta, a lot of that wealth hasn't trickled down back to host communities. And now with the PIB, a bill that affects those communities the most, Why is it that the Senate did not take the time to really go over the proposal and give them at least more than the 3%? The 3% seems to me to be a haphazard number to go with.
You see how these also polarized the National Assembly,
Yeah.
and now people in the host communities, people from the South, are now accusing people from the other region of deliberately scuttling these 5% share for host communities.
Yes.
How has this, how come these very issues seem to have factionalized the country?
Well, I think it's from the way that we actually look at, again, it's from the way that we look at policy in this country. So you see the way we do it, pipelines that run all the way from Wari, for example, all the way to Sokoto. The way the policy is written, every region through which the pipeline passes is known as a host community, which is ridiculous, to be very honest. Transit communities seems to be a more appropriate term for each community where the pipelines go through. The host communities themselves, which have to bear the brunt of their land being used, bear the brunt of pollution, bear the brunt of whatever cost that will be incurred, should obviously be given a different status than a community through which all you're looking for really is right of way. Yes? So I think right from there we have a problem. We have a problem in the definition of what a host community is. And I think representatives from the South are right in calling out the difficulty that this obviously brings about when you make a definition that in reality has no bearing on the difficulties that they already face in the South.
And there's a percentage for oil prospecting, about 30%,
Yes.
for states, communities where there'll be that have prospects of oil, and a lot of these communities, people say, are based in the north, and that is why it seems the northern senators decided to form a bloc against the south and allow some of these things just have its way.
Yes, I understand that, and again, that's simply politics. There's a difference between politics and policy, and unfortunately it seems like in this case politics has overridden what is best for the country versus what is best for a certain section of the country. Now, I personally don't think that there is a problem with a certain sharing formula. The problem is the percentage, and the problem is the way in which the Senate has gone about it. It's one of the reasons that I actually think that when the bill finally does get to the president, he likely won't sign it. Again, not that I presume to know the president's mind, but from my understanding, he's an old school thinker. And if he does not see the reason, and if you cannot explain clearly the reason why you're creating a new paradigm in the place of an old one, it's going to be very hard to convince him to sign the bill, and I don't particularly think that he will on this one. There are too many problems that will be brought about by the bill in its current state, and I think it needs to go back to the Senate for another round.
So we shouldn't even commend the senators for passing this piece of legislation?
No, I think every stakeholder needs to be commended for bringing it to this point.
But is there anything to cheer about in the bill? Is there any?
Of course. I think the bill itself takes into consideration the simple fact that the oil sector is changing, and that there needs to be a reorientation in the way that the oil sector itself is developed and how the oil proceeds are shared. And to a large extent, it also reduces our dependency on the oil sector as the singular source of revenue. So I do think there are things that should be commended about the bill, but I think the problems that will arise from it passing might outweigh those benefits. So it's something that the Senate needs to look into again. It needs to go back to them, and they need to sort out these particular issues before giving it back to the president.
But it appears as if that might be very unlikely, because the Senate, the National Assembly lawmakers just want to push these out of the way as soon as they can, because it's one of the promises also of these Ahmed Lawan and Fem Gbajabiamila-led National Assembly. So it's unlikely that it goes back to the National Assembly.
Lawmaking is a process, and
maybe not this time. It might be.
It may be much later. Maybe much later. Lawmaking is a process, and part of the process is ensuring that there are checks and balances as the law moves forward. So we've come to the point where the last check is the president. It now falls to him to decide whether or not this bill is worth turning into law. From my perspective, again, I don't think he's going to sign it because of the issues that exist within it. But if he doesn't, that simply means it's going to go back to the Senate, and whether or not they decide to take it up again is up for debate.
And if he does sign it?
If he does sign it, I think it would be a costly mistake. Yes.
All right, let me quickly take you up on the Electoral Act Amendment Bill that was also signed by the National Assembly. What's your own take on how that bill was passed and the new document we now have?
I think the Electoral Amendment Act as it is now is a travesty, to be very honest. I remember listening to the Senate President as he was talking about the bill itself. And one of the things that he mentioned was that everyone in the Senate, everyone in the House of Representatives, in fact, agreed that the electronic transmission of results was something that should be instituted across the country. However, the issue was the issue of coverage, whether we have enough coverage. And I'm not exactly sure whether or not the Senate President has the right information, or maybe there are other factors at play which we are not aware of, but I find that to be a very questionable argument. The argument simply being that there isn't enough internet or network coverage in rural areas of Nigeria in order to make this nationally viable. SIM registration takes place in rural areas of Nigeria. POS transactions take place in rural areas in Nigeria. Since 2015, INEC has been using smart cards in order to register voters all over Nigeria. In fact, the highest turnout that we've been seeing has been from rural areas in Nigeria, and they've been using these smart cards to do so. So this can't be an issue of coverage. Secondly, even if you were going to argue that coverage was the main issue, it is entirely possible to encrypt SMS messages so that only your server will recognize the message. So you don't even need 3G to get it done. So I'm not even sure why this is an issue. Well, I do know why it's an issue, but I'm not going to comment on that.
All right, then a very good place to leave it. Faiz Mohammed, policy analyst from the Seed Builders Foundation. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is all on the program this week. Remember, you can watch the show again on TVC News YouTube channel. Also, do not forget to subscribe and share. Thank you for watching. See you next time.